Well, guys, we are back for another episode of the Liberal Asshole Show, episode 66, and the last episode of 2022. So, what are today's topics?
Republicans want to ban both books and internet porn. DeSantis destroying Trump in polls. Kirsten Sinema becomes independence. She didn't become a Republican. Jackson Hinkle is a grifting fascist. Turkey's possible invasion of Syria. And corporations molding over union victories.
Alright, so, to wrap up the year, what do you want to talk about first?
We'll start with the books and internet porn.
Of course, as Republicans and conservatives always want to do, ban shit they don't like, as Kyle covered not once, but both instances. As the second one, actually involves an actual Republican politician. This is just some Karen idiot, I think, who wants to ban books about civil rights in schools. I'm not surprised. And you might think it might be about some CRT crap, which at first it sounds like it, but then when you read later on, you realize, oh boy, she's actually pretty racist. So, let's get into it. As I actually smartly had all the videos up already, that way I can make it easier to edit. So, here we go. Get you up.
Alright, y'all, welcome to the show.
Oh, God, Kyle, I hate when you do this intro now.
God is whispering in his ear about climate change and telling him here. So, Judd Legum of Popular Info has this amazing tweet thread for us here, laying out how this right-wing citizen in Florida is on a crusade to ban books that she doesn't like, that doesn't compart with her politics. So here's what he says. This high school English teacher is trying to ban 150 books from school libraries
150 books throughout Florida at school libraries.
Buckle up, this one gets wild. One book challenged by the teacher, Vicky Baggett, that's her name, is When Wilma Rudolph Played Basketball. The book is about the childhood of Rudolph, a sprinter who won 3 gold medals. It covers how she overcame physical limitations and racial prejudice in the 40s to become a champion. What?
That's a bad
I've never
thing?
seen a
That
less
seems like so
offensive book than
banal.
this. It's about overcoming racial prejudice in a time where there was like literal
It's not even about the standard
segregation in
CRT
place,
crap
by the
they
way,
talk about.
and overcoming physical limitations.
It's just
She wants
being
to
a
ban it.
racist. It's just about
In
being
the
a
challenge
racist
form
piece of
submitted,
shit.
in the challenge form Baggett submitted, I think that's supposed to say, on August 24th, she claims that the purpose of the book is, quote, race baiting, and it is not appropriate for any
Race
age group.
baited.
In an interview, Baggett said the book trashes and puts down those who are not black. She describes
I'm
the book,
sensing
which
a lot
is
of
true
cap in
story
that
of Rudolph's
one.
experience, as very anti-white.
Very anti-white to talk about, and I'm actually looking up this Wilma Rudolph person is indeed real, so based upon a real person, which, hey, that happened to a lot of black athletes decades ago in America, because America was a very racist country back then, so is that hard to talk about? Oh, it's right, because you think anytime talking about civil rights and all that is anti-white, as we all know.
Can't make this stuff up, man. Holy shit. Baggett didn't dispute the book was an accurate portrayal of life in the American South in the 40s, separate water fountains, etc., but insisted it would make white students feel uncomfortable because they are being white-shamed.
That maybe could happen, but I don't. It's not as big of a deal as you all make it out to be, and I don't think people are going to be ashamed about a book about this. Like, come on, like the CRT crap you go after has more of a lot more valid argument for that, but this is definitely this is being silly.
Holy shit! No, they are not. They are doing an accurate retelling of history and an amazing personal story. She can't abide by it. Imagine how insane you have to be to make the argument that she's making. Baggett says when Wilma Rudolph played basketball is inappropriate because, quote, not all whites treated blacks like this.
I'm sure the book does not imply all whites did that back then.
Baggett added that not all blacks do drug crimes, like a lot of people say. Very not racist lady here. Totally
a weird thing to bring up, but that is true.
We've ever seen. Baggett said she challenged the book because she believed it violated the DeSantis Stop Woke Act. The bill prohibits instructing students that they, quote, must feel guilt, anguish because of actions committed in the past by other members of the same race. So, look, let me ask you a question, everybody.
A dumb law, too.
So, if any student feels guilt or anguish because of the history of slavery or Jim Crow, should you just not teach anything about slavery again? Is that the idea?
Exactly, because they don't
Now,
want you to
clearly-
teach that. We're going to get to that in a little bit.
Yes. The more insane fringe people on that side, they say yes. Because that's what she's trying to do. She's trying to stop this totally benign book. Pressed on whether her interpretation of the Stop Woke Act would allow any instruction about historical prejudice, Baggett suggested the book might be appropriate for children starting in the 4th grade. This directly contradicts what she wrote on the form. Baggett's social media accounts raise more questions about her approach to racial issues. In 2015, Baggett posted a picture of the Confederate flag on her Facebook page. Oh boy, here
Not
we go.
surprised.
See, so,
Although, it is true, a lot of people in the South do fly the Confederate flag out of their stupid Southern heritage crap instead of necessarily being racist. But when we get to it later on, it really kind of destroys her defense in that
so
one.
now the real reason comes out. The real reason is she thinks the Confederacy should have won the Civil War. The real reason is she agrees with that backwards philosophy. Not because, oh my God, you're shaming white people and it's unfair to us. That's just a cover story. Baggett said that she posted the flag because, quote, everyone in my clan fought in the Civil War, and she was not ashamed of that. Baggett added that when she was a member of the Daughters of the Confederacy, whoa.
That is a neo-Confederate movement. Man.
She wants to reinstate slavery.
And wants to bring back the CSA. Good luck with that 160 years later, because you'll get squashed once again.
Which has been designed as part of the neo-Confederate movement. As recently as 2018, the Daughters of the Confederacy website stated, slaves for the most part were faithful and devoted. Most slaves were usually ready and willing to serve their masters.
Justifying and making excuses for slavery now. Slaves for the most part were faithful and devoted. Most slaves were usually ready and willing to serve their masters. Yeah. So, yeah. This isn't just some CRT crap or some stupid Karen. This is just a whiny cunt who's just salty that the South lost and wants to do Southern revisionism on us.
Most part were faithful and devoted. Most slaves were usually ready
and most
willing
likely
to
is
serve
pretty
their
racist.
masters. Wow, now.
That's a given.
This is not at all offensive. This is not at all revisionist history. This is factual. But teaching.
Yeah, so yeah, think about that, guys. Right? A book about a personal story about a black woman athlete who had to deal with racism in the 40s and 50s. That's bad and all that. But wanting to defend Southern revisionism, promotes and defends slavery in the CSA, that's okay and should be promoted. Yeah, that's how ridiculous it sounds.
A story, a direct personal story from somebody who persevered and they were black and disabled in the 40s, that goes way too far. These fucking people. Baggett said she did not believe the photo of the Confederate flag she posted on Facebook could make her students uncomfortable.
It does. For a lot of people.
She said her students know me very well, and my best friend is a black woman.
Oh, the good old, I'm not racist, my best friend is black. That's a good one, it never goes away.
This is too perfect. The Escambia County School District is dealing with a flood of book challenges, and nearly all of them were filed by Baggett. Baggett is responsible for 148 of the 150 book challenges in Escambia this year. Wow.
50!
What a thread from,
from
Judd Legum
What
here.
are you doing?
Judd Legum. This is the T.
It's called Karen having nothing to do in her day except complain about everything.
Sure, right here. So just to put this in perspective for you, because look, the narrative for a long time has been it's the left that are petty and censorious and ban happy, and they're the ones who don't
Some
understand
are,
the
but the
Amendment.
right is way more ban happy.
They're the ones who
and they want to ban stuff that's actually good and useful.
Well, guess what? I've showed you this before, but I'm going to show it again. These are the states that lead in book banning. Texas, number 1, 801 bans in 22 districts. Florida, number 2, 566 bans. 2 very right-wing states. Pennsylvania, 457 bans in 11 districts. By the way, the districts where they're doing the bannings are conservative. Tennessee, 349 bans in 6 districts. Oklahoma, 43 bans. Michigan, 41 bans. So you can see here the overwhelming majority of the top book ban-happy places are red states.
Surprise Pikachu face?
So, look, if you are inclined to actually care about the Constitution, actually care about the First Amendment, actually want to prevent book bannings, well, you have some very specific criticism to direct here at a certain segment of the right. But my guess is...
But they don't
Stephen
like that
Crowder's,
because it goes
Ben
after their
Shapiro,
own.
Dave Rubin's, they will say absolutely nothing about any of this. And by the way, I bet even like resistance liberal media like MSNBC, I bet they won't even talk about this stuff in detail. This is
because
astonishing, man. Because, you know, when you hear these stories of like, oh, the right is trying to ban this book from a school or whatever, I think people's default assumption is like, well, what was going on in that book? Was it like some, you know, explicit description of sex that some like second grader was reading?
Because unfortunately, a lot of normies are more willing to believe that stuff and follow along with it, even though it's most likely not all the case.
Scenario, it's like, hey man, you don't want kids reading a sex scene or some shit. But no, it's stuff like this. It's stuff like this that's being banned. Because they don't like the narrative it pushes. And they lie and pretend like, oh, you're shaming all white people by pointing out accurate history. No, you're not. I'm white. I don't feel guilt or anguish. It's just history. And we learn from history. But that's the thing, she doesn't want to. She clearly loves the Confederacy, and she's masking her true feelings. So anyway, barely masking her true feelings. There you have it. A lot of right-wing book bans going on. Hey, y'all.
Because they're all a bunch of Karens. So yeah, what do you gotta say about this Karen this time?
Yep.
Look, you gotta get over it. There's nothing wrong with these books. These are like so mild. This isn't even the standard old CRT crap they always cry about. It's just a book talk about a black woman's athlete's history, dealing with racism in the past, and be an athlete.
This parent wants to ban it because she's triggered and because she loves the Confederacy.
This is no different.
She wants to have her own slaves.
This is no different
than subhuman.
Like no different than talking about Jesse Owens dealing with racism when he won all the medals in the 1936 Olympics. It's not a big deal. So quit being a freaking Karen and stop trying to ban stuff because you don't like it. And maybe you should get your ass on Vicky too if you want to try and win the Civil War like I did before as a CSA. But that requires a brain, which I'm thinking you're not going to have.
Exactly.
Alright, so now
on to ban internet porn.
So now, on to the next one. And this time, it isn't just some stupid Karen conservative woman. This is actually a Republican politician that wants to propose banning internet porn. Way to get the you vote, am I right? So now, let's watch this stupidity.
So for anybody who's been following along, you see an uptick recently in anti-trans arguments, now even anti-gay arguments. Many people thought, hey, we got over the hump with gay rights, and like, you know, this is a fight that Republicans are sort of backing off on because they know they lost it. Over 70% of the country wants gay marriage to be legal. No. The second they saw an opportunity, they said, full court press, let's show them how anti-gay rights we are and anti-gay marriage we are. And so that's how you have a situation where 157 Republicans in the House voted against gay marriage.
Because they're never giving
up. What happened was, I think the right got out over their skis after the whole, like, trans discourse. They felt like they were winning the culture war on the trans front.
Which they weren't.
Going after the LGBTQ community, calling them, you know, groomers, going after teachers and stuff like that. They thought they had a winner there, and so they leaned into it.
Turns out, they were spectacular losers, because the right is always a bunch of losers.
And it sort of led to...
The American population overwhelmingly supports gay and trans rights, so you can eat shit if you don't like hearing that.
This avalanche of social conservatism breaking through again. Well, now we've reached the logical endpoint of that social conservatism. This is in WFLA. Utah Senator Mike Lee proposes bill to ban internet porn in the U.S. It is all part of the same agenda. This is all part of the same agenda. The anti-gay, anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ, this is what this is all part of. Josh Hawley just gave a speech at one of these right-wing conferences and took a shot at porn himself. Here's what they say. Utah Republican Senator Mike Lee has proposed legislation to officially define obscenity as it relates to free speech in a move that would essentially make internet pornography illegal in the United States. For legal...
And just to make it clear, I would not be surprised if they go farther and to ban like anime and stuff like that, because they think all of that is pornographic, even though a lot of anime is not. And other stupid crap. Because they don't know limits, and that's why they have to be opposed at all costs.
For purposes, obscenity is one of few types of speech not protected by the First Amendment and blocked from interstate or foreign transmission by current federal law.
Which is horseshit.
According to a one-page explanation by the Utah senator, the new legislation would modify the Miller test, a U.S. Supreme Court precedent from 1973, which set a way of defining material as sexual or obscene content affecting the prurient interest, hard word, precedent by an earlier SCOTUS ruling.
I'm pretty sure it's Puritan.
Means that something either has or encourages an excessive interest in sexual matters.
Eat shit if it does.
The Miller test ruled that if the average American would find content that appeals to the prurient interest, it is considered obscene. When announcing his bill, Lee said SCOTUS has struggled to define obscenity as it relates to free speech, and that the internet presented serious challenges to the Miller test. So let me pause here to say, the real precedent in this country when it comes to obscenity is we know it when we see it. That's the real standard. Now, of course, there's problems with that. It's mega vague, right? Like, oh, we know it when we see it. But what Bob or Dave thinks is obscene, maybe I don't. And you could have 1,000 different standards with 1,000 different people. But the interpretation of case law to this point, when it comes to stuff like pornography, is basically let it go as long as it's not obviously illegal and wrong. Okay? He wants to change that. Lee's proposed legislation, the Interstate Obscenity Definition Act, would use federal free speech guidelines to make content that, quote, taken as a whole, appeals to the prurient interest in nudity, sex, or excretion, or depicts, describes, or represents actual or simulated sexual acts with the objective intent to arouse, titillate, or gratify the sexual desires of a person. Or when, quote, taken as a whole, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value as obscene.
Which are
Those
wrong
specific
ones, so
definitions were set by the Miller test's definition of obscene speech. While the Miller...
Like, there is literature and artistic value involving, like, nudity and sex and all that. That's been around forever. And I mean forever. So, eat shit if you don't like hearing that.
The test included the legal guide of sexual conduct specifically defined by the applicable state law. Lee's proposal would federally codify the Miller test as it relates to internet materials and content. In other words, the logical result of what he wants implemented would ban internet porn.
Ah, you want to go full South Korean China, I see.
Here. Taken as a whole, appeals to the prurient interest in nudity, sex, or excretion. Depicts, describes, or represents actual or simulated sex acts with the objective intent to arouse, titillate, or gratify the sexual desires of a person. He wants that banned. He wants that gone. Incredible. According to his one-page explanation of the proposal, it would, quote, strengthen the existing general prohibition on obscenity.
There should be no prohibition on obscenity ever.
In other words,
How about
Mike
that?
Lee defines standard porn as obscene, and he wants to ban that. Found in the U.S. Communications Act of 1934 to take out the intent requirement of the ban on transmitting obscene materials for purposes of abuse, threats, or harassment. Doing so would mean transmitting any of these types of materials online would qualify as obscene, since the specificity of purpose would be removed. The full text of the bill, published by Lee, includes types of content that the new guidelines would apply to. Those types of content include pictures, images, graphic image files,
GIFs,
film, videotapes, other visual depictions.
Which affects anime and all that too.
In terms of what Lee would...
a lot of TV shows as well.
And
basically, Leave It to Beaver is all you're allowed to watch.
And also...
similar stupid shows.
And you know what else too? Other visual depictions. That could easily apply to video games too, because that is a visual depiction.
Fine as obscene, the bill lists the following actions. If intended to arouse, titillate, or gratify...
what they specifically approve, which would be the most boring shit in the world, and would make friggin', what's his face? Give me a moment.
by the sexual desires of a person.
Cromwell. It would make Cromwell's Britain look like a fun and exciting place.
So, actual sex acts or simulated sex acts, actual or simulated sexual contact, actual or simulated normal or perverted sexual acts.
Which I'm sure would imply LGBT because they think they're all perverts.
Yeah.
Lewd exhibition of genitals, anything that lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value.
This stuff would apply for literacy and artistic value. It's all subjective, you stupid fucking idiot.
Put simply, the
about
bill would
everything.
remove
That's just
First
about
Amendment protections
everything.
from
That means
and
that they'd basically be banning pretty much nearly every form of media.
ban the distribution of adult materials in the whole of the U.S. However, the new obscenity definition included in Lee's proposal, that the material simply arouses, titillates, or gratifies someone's sexual desires, is bluntly broad. As written, the definition applies to any and all pornographic material, even if performed by and marketed to and transmitted or distributed solely by adults to adults in the United States. So you know who's coming out and arguing against this? All the free speech groups. Because this is, obviously, pornography falls under the content of free speech. The Free Speech Coalition, an adult industry advocacy nonprofit, spoke with Vice News, criticized Lee's legislation as yet another attempt by conservatives to censor speech and expression about sex. FSC Director of Public Affairs Mike Stable told Vice that the bill was, quote, a threat to those working in the adult industry, particularly to their business, to their livelihood, and to their community. Stable said the legislation was unlikely to pass in Congress, but is a sign of a very reactionary cultural movement. That's exactly right. Look, make no mistake about it. If these people had their way, they would ban porn. They would ban porn. There's been an uptick, even just among like conservative commentators, in anti-pornography, anti-masturbation stuff. You know, there was that no fap movement, and now they have some people who are figureheads, who are popular content creators. There is, again, an increase in social conservatism now.
That the majority of
Uber
Americans are
religiosity,
against.
anti-gay, anti-trans,
social fascism.
porn stuff.
Yep.
And of course, it's incredibly ironic because these are the same people who will pretend like they are pro-freedom. Like that's one of the defining characteristics of their politics. Is I want to live and let live. I want people to do whatever they want to do as long as they're not hurting anybody else. Well, you couldn't get a clearer example of somebody doing what they want to do without hurting anybody else. Somebody who watches porn or jerks off or whatever the fuck. We already have a situation where the things that should be illegal are illegal. Like child porn, for example, right? Nobody's in favor of that being legal. But when you talk about consensual adults doing the porn and watching the porn, like ironically, some preposterously high percentage of internet usage is just porn. And these people don't want that. These people want to ban that. That is their ideal. Keep that in mind. Remember that. That's super important. Because again, as soon as people know the right-wing agenda on social issues, they will run away at 1,000 miles an hour. You know, some people were getting hooked in with the anti-trans arguments, like, oh yeah, I don't want my kid being taught that, you know, hey, maybe your kid who's a boy wants to be a girl. Maybe their teacher should let them know about that, bro. Hey man, hands off my kid. There are probably some people who are getting hooked in on that, but then in the next week, when all of a sudden these people are arguing that gay marriage shouldn't even exist anymore, it's like, oh, I see what the real agenda was all along.
Yeah, because normies are pro-gay rights, so you like far-right retards that advocate the stuff like ban porn. You're scaring people away from supporting you. You're making yourself less likely to get what you want, which is good.
And now you see the same thing on the porn front. This dude wants to ban porn. From my cold, dead hands, bitch. And from your cold, dead hands. Or shall we say from our warm hands? Warm because people are jacking off? Anyway, all right, this got weird. But you guys get the gist of it. Mike Lee, get the fuck out of everybody's private life. This is none of your goddamn business. And look, at the core of a lot of this social conservatism is just uber religiosity that they barely try to hide. Everybody take their fundamentalist religion, take their evangelical Christianity, shove it up your ass. You want to practice it on your own? Be my guest. But you have no right or ability to impose this.
Tell you to shove it up his ass because he'd enjoy it.
Yeah.
On other people. And they should be honest and tell you, yes, what we're pushing for is an anti-First Amendment agenda.
And the
Because what
majority
they
of
want to
Americans
do
are
is
against
fundamentally
us.
reinterpret the First Amendment
Always.
to say, well, this stuff doesn't count.
Always has been and always.
No, it does. And it
be.
should. And again, it's freedom. It's one of the few things that, in the U.S., we've kind of solidly been on the right side of it. You know what I'm saying? Like the legality and easy availability of pornography. Because certainly we had the war on drugs, and like people willingly putting a substance in their body has become this big scandal. People get locked up for it and locked up for selling drugs and all this stuff. But this has been a social freedom that we've had for a very long time. And now they want to wage war on that too. And now this motherfucker's proposing a bill about it. Hell no.
Of course.
Piss off. This is crazy. All right, guys. That's
So
the show.
yeah, you guys need to learn to drop this. There's nothing wrong with porn. And if you don't like it, then don't consume it yourself. But people who do, let them consume it and actually practice the libertarian policy and views that you claim to have. Let live, like we do.
Exactly.
And go fuck off. The majority of Americans
Yeah.
are against you. So
Double bird.
accept it and shut up. So yeah, what you guys say about conservatives, of course, being authoritarians as always, to no one's surprise.
It's no surprise. No surprise. They want to ban pretty much everything. So it just controls you. The only thing you can do is exactly what they want you to do. Undo with your Sharia officer sitting next to you.
Alright, so now, what's the next topic?
That would be. Give me a moment. And that is DeSantis destroying Trump in polls.
Yeah, we actually covered this sometime after the midterms, when Trump pretty much got himself humiliated in the midterms, and DeSantis won overwhelmingly in his re-election. For like the last month or so, there is pretty much a civil war going on right now between DeSantis and Trump, as they are like the only people that probably could win the Republican nomination right now, and it's getting quite bad for Trump. And unfortunately, that could be bad for DeSantis too as well. So, let's get into that video now.
All right, guys, welcome to the show.
Oh my
Got
god,
an awesome
Kyle,
one for
stop
you today.
doing these intros. They're
So,
so stupid.
Little wild there, to say the least, so we'll talk about that. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into it here. So,
Literally 1/5 of the video was his stupid intro. That's pretty bad.
this is in Mediaite. The poll is originally from USA Today in Suffolk. They say, shock poll, Trump support cratering. Whopping 61% of Republicans want another candidate for 2024.
61% of Republicans want someone other than Trump to run in 2024. Because remember, he's the only one running right now, I think.
And a lot of them are going to be a lot of them are going to go to DeSantis. So.
And it causes a massive civil war because there's still people that are loyal to Trump and having a meltdown about the DeSantis people, which is funny because they're literally the exact same thing, policy-wise.
61%. So, he's in trouble, man. He's in trouble. Now, they go on to say, and this is probably maybe even more important than that 61% number, quote, they have a name in mind. 2/3 of Republicans and those inclined to vote Republican want Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to run for president. By double digits, 56% to 33%, they prefer DeSantis over Trump.
Wow!
Yep.
So,
22
look, to be
23
fair,
points,
there
actually.
are other polls that have a totally different result.
That's not a
There's
good
some
thing
polls
because
that still
Adolf
have...
death sentence is worse than Trump, but
Trump up double digits. And that's one of the amazing things looking at these Republican primary polls is that you could have all totally legitimate, reputable polling outlets, Quinnipiac, Emerson, Politico, Morning Consult, whatever, and you just get totally different results from day to day. You'll have, Trump up 7, DeSantis up 12, Trump up 26, DeSantis up 21, and you just sit there and you're like, what the fuck? Now, so what accounts for that? I genuinely don't know. Maybe, the methodology is different from poll to poll. In some instances, they're asking likely Republican voters. In other instances, they're asking all Republican voters. I genuinely don't know. But what I do know is we are beginning to see a trend. The trend is clear. And the trend is Donald Trump going down, Ron DeSantis going up. And look,
and not only that, Trump might try and take DeSantis down with him, too, because he's that much of a petty loser.
I told you guys,
because
I think he's a more real threat
than
and the 2016 candidates that Trump bulldozed. Because you have to realize, those people were never popular. Jeb Bush was never popular. He wasn't. Marco Rubio, never popular. Ted Cruz, he was more popular than Jeb and Marco, but still, ultimately, disliked and sort of easy to hate and make fun of. Ron DeSantis has already kind of held on in the eyes of the public and the right-wing base longer than any of those guys ever did, respectively. So, I think it's already more serious than a challenge, of a challenge for Trump than those guys were. And we're going to get into a story in a little bit of how DeSantis is cleverly plotting and what he's doing to gain more and more support from the Republican base. And again, I think it's brilliant. I think it's working. You're going to see how he takes an area of weakness for Trump in the primary, and he's hammering away on that without even mentioning Trump. And again, I think that's smart politics. One of the intelligent things he's done is he's managed to make his own brand, a lane for himself in the era of Trump, when no other Republican has really been able to do it without being a Trump ball licker. He's managing to do that without being a Trump ball licker. So he's not pro-Trump, he's not anti-Trump, he's just quiet about Trump. He's just Trump agnostic.
Just like the governor in Virginia was when he won his election last year. Did the exact same policy.
He's managed to do his own thing and hang on. In terms of policy, he's a standard Republican. He's just like every other Republican. He's very similar to Trump, who's also just like...
Exact same policy as Trump, but more dangerous because he's not as stupid, and he doesn't piss off people like Trump does. Trump pretty much scares off all the people he needs to have any chance to win. DeSantis is more likely to get those people. And that's why, like right now, polls show, if Trump somehow got the nomination right against Biden, Biden would most likely win right now. But that's the reverse with DeSantis. DeSantis is likely to beat Biden. But then, that also the problem with, you gotta rely on Trump. Because if Trump doesn't get the nomination, I would not be surprised if Trump tries to fuck over DeSantis some way, so in the end, Biden still would win.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Not looking good for Republicans right now in 2024, which, hey, good for us on the left.
Every other Republican in terms of his
that would be kind of funny if you got fucked over by Trump being an idiot.
governing agenda. I'm sure if he won the presidency, he would try tax cuts for the rich and deregulation and more military spending and all that garbage, all that bullshit. But in terms of the politics, I think he's a real threat. And with Trump, you have so many things, so many scandals piling one on top of the other on top of the other. Meeting with Nick Fuentes at Mar-a-Lago along with...
Yeah, that was a new one recently where he met Fuentes and Kanye recently, and that was a pretty poor look. You're literally having dinner with an idiot and a freaking self-admitted Nazi, for crying out loud. Like, come on. Like, you gotta know better than that. But then again, Trump's an idiot, so no surprise.
With Kanye West, two absolute psychopaths and, like, Nazis and white nationalists. You have the 17 different court cases that are going on right now with Trump.
January 6th.
Whether it's a civil case in New York for $250 million, or it's that
all those scandals are going to come back to bite him very hard.
His business was just found.
And the Republican base is not going to be enough to get it either, especially when a whole bunch of them are deciding to go to DeSantis at the moment.
Guilty in that case. It had to do with some sort of tax fraud. Whether it's the top secret and classified documents that he stole that there's an investigation in D.C. about that, whether it's the case in Georgia where he called them and said, find me 11,000 votes. Like on tape, basically saying, I'd like to steal the election, please. I'd like to commit a crime on the phone that you catch me red-handed doing. He may as well have said that, right? They did a whole slate of fake electors trying to steal the election. So you got all these things piling up. And then you also have him on Truth Social retruthing QAnon stuff nonstop, saying we need to terminate the Constitution. He's going down and down and down. And as long as the Republican base cares even a little bit about the issue of electability, which granted, previously they haven't done that, but they got draxed 3 elections in a row. So if they get their shit together enough to care a little bit about electability, then he's done. But we don't know if they're going to do that. Ultimately, I'm agnostic on whether or not they're going to prioritize electability or not.
Never will.
We'll have to wait and see. But as of right now, Trump's very unlikely to win a general election, and honestly, it's 50-50 in terms of whether he'll win the primary. The best thing for him would be 10 Republican ghouls running against him. All the non-Trump vote is split across the 10, and then he can win with like 30% of the vote with a plurality, which is crazy, but that's a possibility. But either way,
and then of course he might
changing.
have to. And of course, it also would have to be likely DeSantis does not run either, because
that would be
it doesn't, because it really doesn't matter if there's anti-Trump Republicans that run against him. DeSantis is the only one that has a threat to him. The rest of them are not a threat whatsoever.
Because we know that basically if DeSantis does run, guess what?
Full civil
none
war.
of the anti-Trump Republicans are going to get any votes.
Yep, or maybe they'll think because DeSantis doesn't do mean tweets, so maybe he's nicer, so maybe we'll go vote for him, even though policy-wise it's the same thing as Trump.
Yep.
It's fucking stupid. So yeah. So what do you guys see about this so far between the civil war between these two now? And Trump taking a massive L right now. Fight, keep fighting, weaken yourselves, and make it easier for us. Because yeah, that's what I think right now. In the end, it's not looking good for him. Trump gets the nomination, I think he'll lose to Biden right now, or any Democrat. DeSantis gets a nomination, I think Trump will fuck him over, so in the end, he loses when he has the better chance to win.
Yeah.
So yeah, you better hope Trump, in the next 2 years, gets some sort of hubris to accept an L, but of course, he never can.
Or he winds up in jail.
Or dies.
Yeah. Which is a real possibility.
So now, on to the next topic.
Kirsten Sinema becomes independent, which I'm very surprised she did. I'm not surprised she left the Democratic Party. I'm surprised she didn't become a Republican.
Yeah, so recently, Kirsten Sinema, one of the most evilest Democrats in the country, along with Manchin.
I call her one of the Republicans with a D next to her name. Yeah. Well, now she's a Republican with an I next to her name.
Yeah, they're fake. They're not even Democrats at all in policies. They're pieces of shit, and we've gone after them like the last few years. She claims she's going to retire coming up, which unfortunately, her re-election is until 2024, so we're going to have to deal with her for another 2+ years, unfortunately. So We'll see when the time comes if she indeed is going to actually retire. And who knows, the Democrats, since they're so precarious situation in Arizona, they've started slowly, like, pretty much take over the state, but they're still, like, on a Fred Neal of, like, Arizona being a purple state, so I don't think they're going to try and take back, I'm trying to have a primary challenger, trying to take back the state and all that, so no idea how that's going to work out for her, but this is the video I actually wanted to cover. Instead of her announcing she's an independent, she failed massively in another way. So let's get the video up from David Dole and laugh at Sinema's stupidity.
Yeah. A new poll out from Public Policy Polling shows that not only is Kyrsten Sinema very unlikely to be able to win as an independent senator in Arizona, as she is now officially an independent, left the Democratic Party recently, as I covered, but also Arizona is likely screwed if she does run as an independent in the next election. So let me show you these results. I've covered many Sinema polls in the past, many. These ones, though, I find very interesting because this is the first time we are seeing how she would perform as an independent. As of course, I've shown polls on Sinema in terms of Democratic primary, the next primary, and just getting completely destroyed by competition. So Sinema has really ruined her support base in Arizona with Democrats.
She's tanked really bad in terms of polls.
The main reason.
Even Democrats in Arizona do not like her anymore. She's like up there with like Pelosi in terms of hatred, even among the party, which is awesome. That's what happens when you're a stupid far-right Karen in the Democratic Party. We don't like you, so get lost and take Manchin with you.
She became an independent not because she wants to.
She cares about and Manchin,
the Arizona family, or some other bullshit she's selling. No, it's because she saw the polls. She has no chance to win as a Democrat in the primary, but she also has no chance to win as a senator who's independent. So this from Public Policy Polling, and yes, this is one poll, of course. But, man, is it clear. So the first question here, if the candidates for U.S. Senate next time were Democrat Ruben Gallego, Republican Carrie Lake, and Kyrsten Sinema running as an independent, who would you vote for? So Gallego here
Oh,
loses to
nobody.
Carrie Lake.
I wouldn't even. I'd
41
be like,
to 40, which is a scary thought.
Because unfortunately, according to this poll, Carrie Lake, who's insane, would actually have a 1-point lead over Ruben, which is not good at all.
Yeah,
and
that's
most of that would
not
have to be
good.
because Kristen actually splitting the vote, which I would find weird that she would even be considered running since she said she was retiring coming up.
yeah.
Are you going to pull a Pelosi on us and say you're going to retire or whatever and not do it?
Sinema here, not even close.
Yes.
13%.
Oh, that's right. She probably would, since she knows she's going to lose, but it's more about fucking over the Democrats and make sure a Republican takes back her Senate seat. Not surprised, because
Yep.
she's a bitch.
There's just no...
Yeah.
The support for Sinema is because she was a Democrat. So once she leaves the party,
She was
there
a
are
Democrat
very
and
few
She's a
Sinema
Republican with a D next to her name.
loyalists
Yep.
that are going to stick with her. Why would they? Why would a Democratic voter or a Republican voter decide to go with the independent choice when they understand the power that their party needs in the state? Now, there are some, I don't know, independent thinkers, but the reality is Kyrsten Sinema sides with corporations. So if you are very pro-corporate, maybe if you run a large corporation in Arizona, then your vote is with Kyrsten Sinema. But otherwise, there is really no reason to want to support Kyrsten Sinema. So here she is being the spoiler, getting very little support. Next question here. If the election for Senate in Arizona were held today and the candidates were just Democrat Gallego and Carrie Lake, who would you vote for?
And Ruben wins
And
by
in
1
this
point
case,
now.
With Sinema out of the race,
Nice.
Gallego does win
Yeah,
against Carrie Lake.
I love that Carrie Lake was like, I'm a proud election denying deplorable. My pronouns are I won.
So yeah, Kristen is pretty much trying to be Trump in this possible 2024 scenario, where she's
Yeah.
going to try and spoil it to make Carrie Lake likelier to win if she does run as an independent. Whereas if she's smart and doesn't, then her Democratic replacement could win by 1 point, which is still pretty damn close because Carrie Lake just barely missed out, which is not good. So yeah, Kristen is trying desperately to fuck everyone over.
Showing you that Sinema is in fact the spoiler. So she takes from both parties apparently, but takes a little more from Democrats when she is in the race. So, and this is not, I mean, there's a 0% chance that Sinema is not going to run at all. I mean, maybe she'll drop out if she thinks if it's going to be an embarrassing loss and she doesn't want to be in that. Then I guess I could see her not running again next time and just retiring. But that's the only scenario where that happens. Otherwise, she's likely to run and just spoil the race. Next question here. If the election for Senate in Arizona were held today and the candidates were just Carrie Lake, Sinema running as an independent, who would you vote for? Which is a weird
Carrie
question.
Lake destroys Sinema by 3 points in that situation.
Nice.
Which is not good because we don't need some election-denying cunt in Congress.
Yeah.
But of course, no surprise because
that-
Sinema is so disgusting and a piece of shit that people do not want to vote for because almost 20% say not sure. Like, that's pretty bad when it's that high because both of them are awful.
There is going to be a Democratic candidate. But if it is Sinema and Lake, Sinema also loses to Carrie Lake.
You have no one to blame
there
but
is
yourself,
no scenario
Sinema.
here where Sinema wins.
Exactly.
I mean, maybe if she stayed a Democrat, but even still, it would be a tough road for her, for sure. Other questions here in terms of the support for Biden or Trump. You see it's split. And male, female. There you go. So this is, again, not surprising if you follow Sinema and her path and just the polling we've seen already when it comes to the complete lack of support for her. But maybe it's a wake-up call for Sinema, and I think at this point she'll at least consider, maybe if these polls continue the way they are, and I don't think they're going to change all that much, she may consider not running because of
like we
wanting
said,
to
she said
avoid
before that she wasn't gonna run, so we better make sure she remembers that and she actually doesn't do that because not only is she not gonna win, she's just gonna make it more like a Republican is gonna win, which we do not want, especially Carrie Lake's stupid ass. So yeah, we gotta say about Karen Sinema being a failure again and again and again.
No, it's not really a surprise considering it's Kirsten Sinema. She was a Republican with a D next to her name, and now she's a Republican with an I next to her name. Which is no wonder that she wants to help Carrie Lake.
Yep. Absolutely no surprise whatsoever. So, now on to the next topic.
Here we go. This is the one I've been interesting to cover since we started. Jackson Hinkle is a grifting fascist.
Now, we've made fun of him on the show before, but now we're going to actually talk about him for the first time. So, for all of you who don't know, Jackson Hinkle is a YouTuber who used to be a fellow Bernie bro progressive. And I think he actually tried to be a Justice Democrat, too, a few years ago. So, he used to be good. But over the last few years, but more particularly this year, when Russia invaded Ukraine, he's pretty much flipped to becoming a grifting fascist. And I actually am sharing my screen, if you want to see, of all the stuff he's posted recently. Like recently, with the Andrew Tate fiasco, this is what he tweeted out. Top G's, like who he thinks the best people are. Andrew Tate, Putin, and whoever the leader of Chechnya is. I don't know who this person is. And Xi and Kim Jong-un. Yeah, guys. He thinks Putin, Xi, and Kim Jong-un are based. So, that's already the stupidity we're talking about. And, of course, most of the stuff lately is about Andrew Tate. The woke globalists oppose free speech, God, basic biology, the truth, human flourishing, and innocent until proven guilty. And other stupid crap like that. Because, oh my God, he is so stupid. He fervently supports Russia's invasion of Ukraine, thinks China and North Korea are based, which no one seriously can actually say that. He brings up how the West is satanic a lot, which is a pretty big buzzword. He brings up George Soros and globalists a lot, which is another huge buzzword for anti-Semitism and all that crap. And of course, you've seen this too. He, for some reason, has a massive xenophobic hatred for you all down under lately.
Yeah, really weird.
Let's see, didn't he say he hopes you all sink into the ocean and that all your women are ugly and all that because he's jealous?
Yes, I remember that.
So what do you got to say?
At least over half of our population aren't land whales, Hinkle. So we're like, I really shouldn't be saying that too much, considering Australia's like the second most obese nation in the world.
Can't beat us, the number one for something for once. Oh yeah, he's very fat shaming too. He regularly demonizes people who are fat, which is no surprise, being a piece of shit that he is. As oh my God, this goes on forever and ever and ever. As doing memes against Greta, I see. Really creepy ones, too. And does xenophobic crap about Ukrainians all the time. Putin fires back like...
All Ukrainians are Nazis and deserve to be genocided.
Yep, look, now he's doing anti-trans stuff. Men can't have periods regardless of how mentally ill they might be. A nation dies when its youth spends more time on TikTok and OnlyFans than they do at the gym and with their families. You remind me of the Karen.
What a douche, bro. Dude, hey, Jackson Hinkle, you are terminally online. What the hell are you saying?
Sounds like all the Karens I grew up with that made a big deal about kids and stuff playing video games all the time, even though YouTubers make money off it all the time. A man who lifts weights, avoids porn, and chases his pursuit is free from anxiety, depression, and weakness. That's a fascist buzzword, weakness and all that. If you want to do that, that's your choice, but a man's not weak if one did not do that. Yep, just making excuses and defenses of Russia as it's nonstop. Oh, well, apparently it looks like it's not letting me load up any more tweets. Let me refresh that. Whoa!
He's suspended!
He got suspended for a third time! He got suspended on Twitter again! Live, too! Oh, that could... That's funny, but that kind of sucks though because I didn't even get to the good stuff he tweeted. But that also reminds me, I've also posted really dumb things he said on the Liberal Asshole Show Discord, so how about we go look them up? Oh yeah, here's a good one that he just posted a few days ago that I responded to. The American people stand with Russia to defeat Nazism in Ukraine just as we stood with the Soviet Union to help defeat Nazism in Germany. No. Just know, the vast majority of Americans support Ukraine, you grifting fascist POS.
Yep.
So,
I love that.
Oh my god. Here's the one you posted. Australia is one of the worst countries on the planet. No one would notice if it sinks. Far too many dangerous animals, insects that would kill you. Mid women and no cuisine. Oof. So we gotta see about all four of those.
The only one that he has a good point on is that we've got a lot of deadly wildlife.
But that's like everywhere.
That's partly because Australia's been isolated from the rest of the world since the Cretaceous period.
But the thing is too, there's dangerous animals all over the world. Australia's not the only one with it, which is even insane, which is crazy. Yeah. But happy that no one would notice if you sink. You have no hot women apparently, and your food sucks.
That's projection from an American whose 80% of their cuisine is just deep fried.
No surprise, since I eat that shit too. At least I can acknowledge it. And let's see, what else is he crying about? Oh yeah, he's such a fascist that he and Haas, no joke, actually support invading Canada to liberate. And here's an actual... Actually, I don't know if this video would work since they got suspended, but let's see. Please work. Nope, couldn't play. But there was a video of him actually saying that America should invade Canada to liberate them from the British Crown and all that.
Once they become communists, they should invade the rest of the world, liberate them from the shit libtard bags.
So, Harry, if you're still there, what do you gotta say about that? Your beloved Danny boy being imperialist that wants to annex Canada to get revenge from the War of 1812.
Supporting grifters, being a grifter. Oh yeah, that's right. You love that because you have gone from being a leftist to being a fascist piece of shit.
Oh my god, now all the other tweets aren't showing up unless I have pictures. Oh man, nothing's showing up anymore as they go back on. Dang it, Twitter, why couldn't you suspend him another time? That way we could have laughed at his stupid stuff. We got, like, all the goody stuff didn't get showed up now because of you. But that's funny. Live as we did it, that's the third time, like, in the last few months that he's gotten suspended. 2 times in December as well. Oof. Not having a good luck there. Maybe you should stop supporting fascism and maybe you wouldn't get banned and suspended all the time. Because it's not based. So yeah, what do you guys say about this? His stupidity and he got suspended live.
Hysterical. Absolutely hysterical that actually happened.
But yeah, what do you gotta say about so what you gotta say about him?
You should put that as a short on your channel and be like Jackson Hinkle gets suspended from Twitter live.
Except I don't know how to make it short though, but that was hilarious.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But what do you guys say about Mr. Hinkle boy?
That was so funny.
So we got to say about Mr. Hinkle boy.
It's not so. People are like, Herb and Derp, the horseshoe isn't real. And it's like, Jackson Hinkle has ridden that freaking horseshoe all the way around. And it's not a horseshoe for him. It's now a extended circle since he's gone from Bernie Bro leftist to fascist via the so-called MAGA communist route.
Yeah, another thing too, because I wanted to show, because he also has a big problem with women. Like, he cannot stop blaming women for everything. Everything. And pretty much implying that women's job is to be in the kitchen all the time. And all the stupid...
Well, that's not a surprise. And very fascist.
And no surprise, because he says you all have mid-women down there. Because he's jealous. So yeah, any final words on Hinkle Boy here?
Not really. Just rip bozo.
I hope you enjoyed that third suspension on Twitter. Like I said, maybe stop being a fascist POS and maybe you wouldn't get banned all the time. Alright, so now, on to the next topic.
That would be Turkey's possible invasion of Syria.
Which, of course, this is involved in the Syrian civil war. It's been going on for almost 12 years now, and not just America and Russia's also been involved. Turkey, who's neighbor to Syria, also has been involved. And there are rumors that they might invade the northern part of Syria and all that to try and destroy the Kurds and all that. So, let's watch Real Life Lore's video on it. Let's get this up.
On the 13th of November 2022, a bomb exploded in a crowded shopping area of Istanbul, the largest city in Turkey. 6 Turkish civilians were killed in the blast, and more than 80 others were wounded. And within 24 hours of the attack, the Turkish government unilaterally blamed the Kurdish separatist groups operating in Turkey and Syria known as the PKK and SDF, despite each of their claims of having nothing to do with it. And within a week of the attack, Turkish jets and artillery systems began bombing PKK and SDF positions across northern Syria and Iraq in a campaign of reprisals. The Turkish president, Tayyip Recep Erdogan, then went another step even further and insisted that these aerial and artillery attacks on Kurdish positions in Iraq and Syria were only the beginning. On the 21st of November, he threatened to order a full-scale ground invasion into northern Syria against the Kurds there in order to establish what he and his supporters have long been calling.
And just as the map shows, Turkey already is invaded Syria years ago.
Yeah.
So violating their territory.
No. Remember, when Turkey's doing this, we do not call them Turkey. We call them the Neo-Ottoman Empire.
Yep, because that's what Erdogan the fascist wants. Plus invading Iraq's airspace too.
Yep.
So
a
30-kilometer deep
Turkey's possible invasion of Syria. It's the Neo-Ottoman Empire's possible continued invasion of Syria.
Safe zone just across the Turkish border into Syrian territory that would be occupied and policed by the Turkish army. As all eyes in the West and NATO have been focused on the war in Ukraine, the decade-long brutal civil war in Syria continues. And with this upcoming invasion into the country from Turkey looming, the conflict appears to be entering a new and potentially even more dangerous phase than before that could see the United States having to refocus its attention back on the troubled country once again. And in order to understand why Turkey is considering,
even though it's none of our business and we're also already there illegally,
during this invasion into Syria now and the potential consequences it will have on the war, you have to understand a few basic geopolitical and demographic realities around the area that are pushing them into it first. Let's begin with the fact that Turkey isn't entirely an ethnically homogenous nation-state in the same way that other countries are, like France, Japan, or Germany. When you look at an ethnic map of the country, you will notice that the Turks make up a majority nearly everywhere except for the entire southeastern corner, which is demographically dominated instead by the Kurds, an Iranian ethnic group who speak their own separate language that by far make up the largest ethnic and linguistic minority in Turkey. There are around 15 million of them who live within Turkey today, and that means they make up around a fifth of the entire country's population. But the Kurds don't just exist in the southeastern corner of Turkey. It's estimated that there's anywhere between 30 and 45 million Kurds who exist throughout a large area that spans across the borders of southeastern Turkey, northeastern Syria, northern Iraq, and western Iran. And because these tens of millions of Kurds are divided between the borders of these 4 separate countries, the Kurds represent one of the largest nations of people in the world without a state of their own. And that means that from time to time, there have been nationalist calls within the Kurdish area here to create that state that would, hypothetically, be called Kurdistan. However, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran have all brutally repressed these Kurdish calls for statehood over various different times over the past century for the very simple fact that if any one group of Turkish, Syrian, Iraqi, or Iranian Kurds ever managed to achieve independence or autonomy, it could end up causing a cascading domino effect that would unite all of the other other Kurdish regions into that single state of Kurdistan. If, for example, the Kurds in Syria managed to achieve independence or autonomy from the government of Syria, then it could serve as a free base of operations for the rest of the Kurds in Turkey, Iraq, and Iran to operate out of and work towards their own independences and the greater goal of Kurdistan, which, in Turkey's case, would result in the loss of basically the entire southeast of the country, along with the millions of people who live there who pay taxes and contribute to the economy. And that is something that for the past century, the Turkish government has found to be completely unacceptable. Turkey has thus repressed the Kurdish people within their own borders for nearly a century.
No, not just oppress, cultural genocide, which Iraq, Iran, and Syria have also done to the Kurds. Because they are genocidal fascist states.
They weren't even officially classified as being a separate identity from
the entire Middle East is, pretty much.
Turks until 1991. The words Kurds and Kurdistan have previously been banned in any language in the country, and after 1980, the Kurdish language itself was officially outlawed in public and private life as well for the next decade. It is still, to this day, illegal in Turkey to use the Kurdish language as a language of instruction in both public and private schools.
Cultural genocide, not allowing people to speak their languages.
As a consequence of this repression, there has long been a degree of activism within the Kurdish areas of southeastern Turkey for increased autonomy from the government or outright independence, backed up by both peaceful protesters and armed guerrilla warfare and terror attacks. The most prominent and violent of the Kurdish separatist forces to emerge in Turkey eventually became the Kurdistan Workers' Party, better known as the PKK. In 1984, the PKK declared a Kurdish uprising against the Turkish government and started a full-scale insurgency campaign. And over the decades that have followed, the PKK expanded their operations in the fight against the Turkish state into the Kurdish majority areas of Iraq and Syria, and more than 40,000 people are believed to have been killed in the fighting and the terror, most of them being Kurdish civilians. Thus, Turkey has spent decades fighting a brutal campaign to stamp out the PKK and Kurdish separatism from the southeast of the country. Turkey has suffered as much as $450 billion in estimated economic losses over the years fighting against them, and they have frequently...
Maybe you should stop trying to oppress them and let them be who they want to be? And maybe give them some sort of autonomy? How about that one?
launched incursions to attack PKK bases and operations in the Kurdish majority areas in neighboring Iraq and Syria. But for the most part,
the Middle East
and
do it properly this time.
Iraq and Syria.
But of course, you know all four of them will never accept losing land like that.
Each repressed their Kurdish populations as well, and so they didn't necessarily...
Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and all them, with maybe the exception, honestly, with a weird exception of big chunks of much of Turkey, or now Neo-Ottoman Empire, they actually, most of them are actually fake states with randomly drawn borders.
And Iran also had its borders for like the last several hundreds of years.
Mined the Turkish incursions into their territories, attacking the PKK. The Syrian and Iraqi governments didn't want an independent Kurdistan to emerge for the same reasons the Turks didn't want one. But
guess what? That pretty much already is the case with Syria and Iraq. Like, the Kurds in North pretty much already do have somewhat, like, massive amounts of independence. To the point where Iraq, their Kurdish, like, autonomous state is, like, the most progressive state in the Middle East, which is awesome.
Everything began to change in the 2010s, when the Syrian government suddenly became no longer capable of repressing their Kurdish population. When Syria imploded into a devastating civil war in 2011, the instability and chaos there proved the perfect opportunity for armed Kurdish groups in the northeast to finally carve out their own autonomous zone of control, separate from the Assad regime based in Damascus. The primary Kurdish faction in Syria eventually became known as the YPG, and later the Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF. And after they became supported by the United States, they became highly effective in establishing a large swath of de facto control over the Kurdish majority area of northeastern Syria. But Turkey was always going to view the emergence of an autonomous Kurdish area in northern Syria like this as a grave threat to their own national security, because Turkey's own Kurdish separatist groups like the PKK PKK could, hypothetically, begin using it as a free base of operations to coordinate the insurgency campaign in southeastern Turkey from. And worst of all, if northeast Syria became an independent Kurdish state, it could end up triggering the domino effect of the other Kurdish majority areas in the Middle East achieving independence, which could lead to the eventual secession of southeast Turkey. And thus, part of the reason that Turkey has invaded northern Syria on multiple occasions already has been precisely to prevent this from ever happening. Currently, the Turkish army and Turkish-backed proxies in Syria already control large swaths of the northern part of the country acquired through previous Turkish invasions and interventions in the Civil War. But what Turkey wants to do now is to greatly expand their zone of control at the expense of the Kurdish forces. The 30-kilometer deep so-called safe zone across the north of the country that'll be occupied by the Turkish army. If Turkey is successful in establishing this zone, it'll create a deep buffer zone between itself and the Kurdish rebels and regime forces in Syria, and thus deny an easy way for Kurdish separatists and PKK elements to travel back and forth across the border. Turkey claims, in opposition to the United States and the rest of NATO, that the SDF in northern Syria and the PKK in southeastern Turkey are both one and the same and share the ultimate objective of establishing a unified state of Kurdistan and destabilizing Turkey. And by pinning...
How about tough shit? And also, how would it destabilize you if you lose territory for an ethnic group that doesn't want to be a part of you? That would make you even more stable, if anything. Because then you get rid of that foreign once and for all. So how about that one?
Pinning the blame of the recent terrorist attack in Istanbul on the PKK and the SDF, Erdogan has gained the casus belli he needs to carry out the invasion and establish his desired safe zone, which he and his supporters insist will prevent future bombings and terrorists from being able to cross the border into Turkey. But there's also another reason why Turkey wants to do all of this. In the aftermath of the Syrian civil war, more than 3.6 million, mostly Arab Syrians, have fled the country into Turkey as refugees, which represents the largest demographic shift in Turkey's history since the Greek and Turkish population transfers of the 1920s. The arrival of so many millions of Syrians into Turkey was initially welcomed by the government, but it has since become an issue of extreme political polarization. Many Turkish nationalists have long been calling for the Syrian refugees to be deported from the country, and their plight has not been helped by the severe worsening of the Turkish economy. The inflation rate in Turkey is now over 85% and the highest it's been since the 1990s. And just a few years ago in 2019, the euro was still worth 6 Turkish lira. And now it's worth roughly 20. And ahead of the Turkish presidential election coming up in June, nationalist parties in Turkey have begun to scapegoat the Syrian refugees for causing the economic crisis. And public opinion has begun to sharply shift against them. President Erdogan himself said back in May that he would voluntarily relocate 1 million of the refugees back to Syria. But some of his political opponents in the upcoming election have insisted on going even further, like this guy who says that he will deport all 3.6 million of them back to Syria within 2 years of him assuming office. Or this guy who said that he'll do it within 1 year. Nearly every mainstream political party in Turkey is currently advocating for the deportation of Syrian refugees back to Syria. But sending millions of people back to a chaotic, war-torn country that they don't feel safe going back to is obviously a recipe for disaster. And that's why the Turkish government's plan is to simply resettle them all instead into the proposed 30-kilometer wide safe zone that is the prime objective of the next invasion. But resettling millions of mostly Arab refugees within this zone will not only ease the societal pressures and anti-refugee sentiment within Turkey, it will also heavily dilute the Kurdish population in northern Syria with millions of Arabs, and thus weaken the Kurds' demographic hold in the area across the border from the Kurdish majority areas in Turkey.
Another
the establishment
genocidal
of the
method,
so-called safe
demographic
zone
change
will also
like that,
strengthen Turkey's
by force.
grip in Syria and ensure them a seat at the negotiating table for whenever the Syrian civil war finally comes to a conclusion. Now, President Erdogan has used the Turkish military to invade and intervene in Syria multiple times in the recent past already, and they've all been steadily building up to this greater goal of the continuous so-called safe zone. They have also always happened to coincide with important elections within Turkey itself, or
That's how it
immediately
always
after
is.
Erdogan's own approval ratings have taken a dive. Just look at this chart. Each of the 4 previous Turkish invasions into Syria resulted in sharp upticks in Erdogan's approval ratings as the Turkish army saw victories on the battlefield. And now Erdogan is facing what is potentially his greatest political challenge yet. With a struggling currency and sky-high inflation, Erdogan's approval rating within Turkey is currently barely hovering over 40%, and he stands to face a very possible defeat in his upcoming election in June. Consequently, he almost certainly believes that another decisive military victory in Syria against the Kurdish factions there that will expand the so-called Turkish safe zone will bump up his electoral chances in June and enable him to continue hanging on to the presidency. But one of the biggest problems for Erdogan and Turkey's proposed invasion into Syria is that it will come into direct conflict with one of Turkey's greatest supposed allies, the United States. Washington's primary interest in the Syrian civil war has always been countering the rise of ISIS as best as it can, which shocked the world in 2014 when it suddenly seized control over nearly a third of Syria in a blitzkrieg-style offensive. The United States then began a targeted bombing campaign of ISIS targets from the air, while they began to heavily supply the Kurdish factions in the SDF in northeast Syria with weapons and advisors to simultaneously fight against ISIS on the ground. The strategy largely worked out, and ISIS began to crumble and lost most of their ground by 2017. But the United States was unprepared for how badly this strategy was going to blow back and alienate one of their other allies, Turkey. Turkish and American interests in Syria began to radically diverge because Turkey insists that the SDF and the PKK are essentially the exact same organization. And so according to them, that meant that American weapons and training for the SDF
believes that all Kurds are PKK.
Would eventually be used by the
believes that all Ukrainians are Nazis.
PKK against the Turkish government and their ongoing insurgency in southeast Turkey. And conversely, the US recognizes the PKK as a terrorist organization just like Turkey does, but they insist that the SDF is a truly separate organization that is strictly dedicated to fighting against ISIS and maintaining its autonomy within Syria. This is why after Erdogan's announcement in late November that he was planning a ground invasion against the US allied SDF in Syria, the Biden administration in the United States was quick to condemn it for undermining the fight against ISIS, because it would mean the Kurdish SDF troops would have to largely abandon the fight against ISIS in order to defend themselves from the Turks. But the United States can't really do a lot about the Turkish invasion plan other than offering up harsh words, because Turkey currently holds a lot of geopolitical leverage over NATO and the European Union. With the enormous all-out Russian invasion of Ukraine, the attention and focus of each have been highly distracted from Syria. Finland and Sweden each applied to finally join the NATO alliance in the face of the war in Ukraine, but their memberships have to be approved by every single other member already in NATO, and Turkey has been deliberately stalling on giving out that approval. Turkey is currently demanding that Sweden and Finland each extradite accused PKK members in their countries back to Turkey to stand trial, and that Finland end their ongoing arms embargo on Turkey, which they implemented years ago over concerns that the Turks were using those weapons in Syria against civilian targets. In exchange for meeting these demands, Turkey has agreed to accept their applications into NATO. But with a new Turkish ground invasion into northern Syria looming against the nominally US-allied Kurdish SDF, the United States will most likely not want to do anything to provoke Turkey's wrath any further that could lead them to further block.
I mean, I'm pretty sure there's still American troops there because America is in Syria, so...
Yeah.
I know Trump took a whole bunch of them out, which led to Turkey invading them before, but maybe, even though you really shouldn't be there, maybe if you put troops there, maybe Turkey will have a second thought about doing that to possibly not start like an inter-NATO war between them and America. Because that is what led Turkey for several years to not invade Syria, because American troops are there and they're afraid of the consequences if they accidentally shoot them. So maybe you should consider that, even though we should not be in Syria at all in the first place. But maybe apply economic or military pressure, not military, economic and diplomatic pressure for them to leave Syria alone and deal with that Kurds don't want to be a part of you, eat shit, just like China needs to accept Taiwan doesn't want to be a part of them, and Russia needs to accept that Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia don't want to be a part of them. You gotta go, okay,
locking Sweden and Finland's memberships into NATO, or pushing the Turks even further into the orbit of Moscow. There was already an intense spat back in 2017 when the Turks agreed to purchase the Russian-made S-400 air defense system.
Yep, I remember that. America was so stupid to make a big deal about it. So what if Turkey wants to buy anti-air defenses from Russia? Get over it.
Which led to economic sanctions being slapped upon Turkey by their own NATO ally, the United States. Thus, it is likely that if and when Turkey does initiate this invasion, the United States will probably choose to abandon their Kurdish allies and throw them under the bus in exchange for getting the Turks on board with letting Sweden and Finland into NATO in order to further counter the Russians in Northern Europe. Turkey is well aware of this complicated geopolitical calculus, and therefore knows that this is
along with Turkey being very useful in the diplomatic situation with the Russo-Ukraine wars we covered over the last several months. Like, they're pretty much being like the neutral party for like diplomatic stuff, like they did the grain deal in Turkey and all that.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, as much as Turkey pretty much sucks and Erdogan's a disgusting piece of shit, he's unfortunately pretty much needed when it comes to the Russo-Ukraine war because of his neutrality.
their best opportunity to seize what they want in northern Syria. Now, the other big international player in the Syrian civil war besides the United States has historically been the Russians. Initially, Russia and Turkey's geopolitical interests in the civil war clashed because Turkey wanted Assad to step down from power and Russia wanted him to remain in power at all costs. You see, Russia has a vital interest in keeping the Assad regime in power in Syria because it is his regime that grants the Russian Navy their access and lease over the port here at Tartus, the only operational base that the Russian Navy is able to use on the Mediterranean Sea. This is critical because it spares Russian warships operating in the Mediterranean the necessity of having to sail back through the narrow NATO-controlled choke points of the Turkish Straits to reach Russia's own ports on the north side of the Black Sea whenever they need replenishments or repairs. Tartus therefore enables the Russian Navy to operate within the Mediterranean independently of Russia's own bases on the Black Sea coast, which could always be theoretically bottled up and contained there by NATO closing down the Turkish Straits. Without Tartus, the Russian...
which they did several days into the Russo-Ukraine war. So that's why Russia cannot leave the Black Sea, nor can they send ships into the Black Sea, which is why their Black Sea fleet is being pretty much locked up in their territory to avoid Ukrainian missiles hitting them.
Navy would no longer be capable of functioning in the Mediterranean with a base to repair and replenish itself at during a war with NATO. And that is why the Russians want to keep Assad in power. If Assad was ever toppled, there would never be any guarantee to the Russians that whatever new regime replaces him would renew their lease to the port at Tartus. And that could mean their entire Mediterranean strategy against NATO could just always go up in smoke. So the Russians began to massively support the Assad regime's forces with airstrikes.
Maybe if you just stop being an aggressive piece of shit, maybe you wouldn't have to worry about NATO so much because you make NATO expand. How about that one?
Strikes against rebel factions beginning in 2015, and that eventually led to the regime taking back control over most of the country. Turkey's goals then gradually shifted over time from toppling the Assad regime outright to simply controlling the regions in the north of Syria immediately across from their border. And so the Turks and their proxy forces, and the Russians and the regime, were able to somewhat cooperate together against mutual foes like ISIS and the Kurdish separatists. That is why in 2018, the Russians and the regime and the Turks and their proxies in the north agreed on a de-escalation agreement in Syria where both sides agreed to stop attacking each other's positions. But a thorny point in the agreement came in the form of the Idlib governorate, or province. You see, by 2020, Arab rebels remaining within Syria who were opposed to the Assad regime and not under the influence of Turkey had been essentially limited and contained to just this part of this one province, leading to it being dubbed in much of the international media as Syria's last rebel stronghold. The faction that came to dominate this last of the rebel strongholds in Syria came to be known as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, a radical fundamentalist jihadi faction still bent on overthrowing the more secular Assad regime and establishing a fundamentalist Sunni Islamic government within Syria.
Which
now,
cannot happen
HTS's territory in Idlib is placed a mere 35 miles away from Hmeimim, the primary air base that the Russian Air Force has used as its base of operations in Syria, and only 75 miles away from the all-important Russian naval base at Tartus. Naturally, Russia and the Assad regime would prefer to see HTS eliminated and taken over. But there were also around 4 million Syrian civilians who live within HTS-controlled territory. Were the regime to take them all over, it's likely that a lot of those millions would be transformed into refugees and attempt to flee immediately across the border into Turkey, a country where public opposition towards Syrian refugees has recently become extremely high. Absorbing millions of additional refugees from Syria is a politically untenable option for Turkey right now, and that's why the Turks and the Russians both effectively agree to keep Idlib as a neutral zone outside of both of their control. The Russians wouldn't support regime offensives into Turkish-backed proxy territory or HTS territory that could generate a fresh refugee crisis for Turkey, while the Turks agreed that they would prevent HTS from expanding their territory any further that could put Russian geopolitical interests in the Mediterranean in jeopardy. But the Syrian regime's other major international backer, the Iranians, never made any such promises. After the Russians invaded Ukraine in February of 2022 with hundreds of thousands of troops, and soon after began mobilizing hundreds of thousands more after their sharp battlefield losses and heavy casualties, the Russians began pulling troops and equipment out of Syria towards the more important front line in Ukraine. That left a power vacuum in Syria that has been steadily getting replaced by the Iranians. You see, Iran also supports the Assad regime in Syria, but for completely different reasons than the Russians do. Assad himself is an Alawite Shiite Muslim, and his regime has long been friendly to the world's most preeminent Shia Muslim power, Iran. The Alawite Shia make up a minority within Syria at only about 10% of the population, while the Sunnis make up the vast majority at over 74%. But it has been the Shia Alawites who have dominated the Assad regime's government for decades, and the fellow Shia-dominated Iran needs them to remain in power so they can continue
pretty
reliably
much geopolitical Sunni-Shia conflict, just like how the Reformation in Europe with Christianity was.
transporting weapons and supplies overland via their Shia militia proxies in Iraq, then through friendly Syrian territory onto their other proxy group Hezbollah in Lebanon, so that Hezbollah can continue fighting against one of Iran's greatest enemies, Israel. But it's not just these military objectives and better geopolitical posture against Israel that Iran wants out of Syria. They also want a rail corridor extending overland across Iraq and Syria towards the Syrian port of Latakia, which, if achieved, would enable the Iranians to export oil and gas supplies more directly to European consumers, in the event that Western sanctions are ever dropped or relaxed in the future. And in order to ensure that these objectives are met, Iran wants the friendly Assad regime to remain in power and re-establish control from whatever remains of the mostly Sunni rebels in order to ensure continued Shiite dominance, and that includes crushing the fundamentalist Sunni faction HTS in Idlib, arguably the final obstacle standing in the way of the Assad regime's total victory in Syria. As hundreds of Russian soldiers and contractors have been pulling out of Syria and getting redeployed to Ukraine, Iran and their various Shiite militias have been sending thousands of highly motivated men into Syria to replace them. And while the Russians were accommodating to the Turks and their interests in Syria, the Iranians most definitely are not, and they want any elements in the country that could become hostile to their own agenda purged from any future government or settlement. Iran is therefore much bolder than the Russians were in helping the Assad regime recapture all of its lost territory from the rebels. And they are likely to encourage and even support new regime offensives into Idlib against HTS that could trigger a fresh new migration crisis into Turkey. Erdogan and Turkey are each aware of this potential looming humanitarian catastrophe, and it is likely yet another reason that they want to invade and carve out their 30-kilometer deep safe zone now. When the regime and the Iranians push into the final rebel stronghold in Idlib, millions more Syrians who don't want to live under the Assad regime could suddenly transform into refugees, and rather than fleeing immediately across the border into Turkey, the Turks could be hoping to instead resettle them across their proposed so-called safe zone within Syria, with the added benefit from their perspective of further diluting away the demographics of the Kurds there at the same time. And with Russia unable to oppose the operation, and with the US most likely unwilling to oppose it, and with Erdogan himself desperate for a major foreign policy victory to increase his odds of winning re-election in June,
Neo-Ottoman Empire.
All signs are pointing to an eventual massive Turkish invasion bent on expanding their zone of control across northern Syria. But Turkey's increasingly aggressive foreign policy extends well beyond the borders of Syria, and most of it all began back in 2009. In that year, a discovery was made here in the Eastern Mediterranean that would change Turkey's foreign policy and destiny forever. The Israelis discovered a series of enormous offshore natural gas deposits within their exclusive economic zone, followed up shortly afterwards by additional huge discoveries within the EEZs of Cyprus and Egypt. But none were ever discovered within the UN-backed internationally recognized EEZ of Turkey, which, because of Greece's thousands of islands in the Aegean and Cyprus, is heavily restricted in size and mostly bottled up to being immediately around Turkey's own coastline. Naturally, Turkey rejects this international consensus on its maritime boundaries and unilaterally insists, based on its own interpretation of international law, that its own maritime boundaries look a lot more like this, a concept that Turkish nationalists refer to as the Blue Homeland, and which could
happening.
So basically, Turkey is trying to go the China route and violate countries' EEZ zones to get natural resources. No surprise.
Actually, include the same kinds of rich natural gas deposits that have already been found in the waters of Cyprus, Israel, and Egypt. But nobody else in the world ever recognized Turkey's ambitious maritime claims here until suddenly in 2019, the Tripoli-based government in Libya signed a deal with the Turks that established the boundaries of their mutual maritime borders to look like this. That deal essentially confirmed the Tripoli-based government's recognition of Turkey's maritime claims, which of course meant that it ignored the usual boundary rules established for maritime zones by the United Nations. It also meant that the proposed Turkish and Libyan maritime zones each cut into the UN-recognized boundaries of Greece and Egypt, which put them both into a coalition against Turkey. Now, at the same time, just like Syria, Libya was wrapped up in the midst of a devastating and chaotic civil war between two rival governments, one based in Tripoli and the other based in Tobruk. Within months of signing the Maritime Pact with the Tripoli-based government, the Turkish military began to funnel troops, mercenaries recruited from their proxies in Syria, intelligence operatives, air support, and naval assets to them in order to help fight against the Tobruk-based government in the war. If the Turks helped the Tripoli-based government win the war, they would secure Libya's recognition of their ambitious maritime claims in the Eastern Mediterranean. But just as in Syria, they ended up falling on the other side as the Russians, who began to heavily support and back up the rival Tobruk-based government. The civil war in Libya thus descended into one of the most devastating and most geopolitically important proxy conflicts of the 21st century, with an unexpected list of countries supporting opposing sides, as Turkey and their Syrian mercenaries, along with Qatar, Iran, Italy, the UK, and United States, all backed up the Tripoli-based government, while the Syrian Assad regime, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Russia, France, Greece, and Israel all backed up the Tobruk-based government. Many countries who were nominally allies in other theaters found themselves as enemies backing opposing sides in the Libyan civil war. And even though a ceasefire agreement was technically signed that ended the war more than 2 years ago now near the end of 2020, nationwide elections that were previously agreed upon have been delayed on multiple occasions and have still yet to actually ever take place. And that threatens to potentially reignite the war and bring all of the international powers like Turkey back in who want to intervene. The civil war in Libya is directly connected to Turkey's greater geopolitical ambitions and the oil and gas politics of the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean. But unfortunately, if I made an in-depth video covering all the details of
Of course, we're going to have to stop right here because it's going to go on for a few minutes promoting the other channel and all that. So yeah, what do you guys say about Turkey being an authoritarian imperialist piece of shit as always?
No surprise coming from the Neo-Ottoman Empire. Their whole existence is based on genocide and slaughter.
We need Ataturk back to kick the shit out of Erdogan out of office and have a liberal revolution in the country. So, with that out of the way, on to the final topic.
Corporations molding over union victories.
A brand new video that Second Thought just uploaded earlier, and I was watching a little bit before we started. So, let's get to that to wrap up today. Here we go.
This episode is brought to you.
Voted to unionize for the first time in the face of strong opposition from management.
The union says the deal includes pay raises of up to 66% over 2.5 years.
A historic vote in New York City. Workers at an Amazon warehouse in Staten Island will unionize, a first in the U.S. in Amazon's 27 years.
It's a great time for unions right now. The win rate for union elections is steadily rising. Strikes are up from last year, and public support for unions is at a 57-year high. While unions only represent a relatively low 10-ish% of the workforce, it used to be around 20% in the 80s and around 30% in the 50s, all signs point to us being at the start of something big. Workers at Amazon, Apple, Chipotle, REI, Starbucks, Trader Joe's, and lots of other companies where unionization once seemed impossible have made headline after headline after headline with unprecedented union victories. And that's really exciting because unions make people's lives so much better. Unions, like the word implies, unite workers together to fight for their collective interests when their employers would rather pit them against one another. And that has massive consequences. A union worker, all else being equal, meaning same education, occupation, and experience, makes 13% more than a non-union worker. And over the course...
Which is why unions should be supported right then and there, because thanks to unions, you make more money, which is always a good thing. Am I right, peoples?
Of an entire career, that works out to an extra $1.3 million on average. Union workers are more likely to have employer-sponsored health insurance, and
because of unions, you got health benefits too, and all the other stuff. Yet you all shit on them.
Employer typically pays more of it. Union workers are also more likely to have paid sick leave and vacation, and more of both. More likely to have a retirement plan, and less likely to be fired. Union contracts come with due process protections that stop employers from firing people at will. And multiple studies have found that unionized workplaces are safer, they have fewer workplace accidents, and fewer fatalities. And the benefits of a union don't just go to unionized workers. If unionization goes up in your area or your industry, studies find that your wages will go up too, even if you aren't part of a union, thanks to something called the union threat effect. Basically, your employer, seeing that unionization is possible right next door, is likely trying to avoid it happening at your job by increasing your wages and/or benefits in anticipation. Everybody wins. And it's not hard to see why someone working at, let's say, Amazon might want to join a union. It's not only about the statistics. When a company feels comfortable forcing its employees to work past the point of safe evacuation in a tornado,
which, remember, I think we covered too, happened last Christmas when tornado outbreak in Kentucky, and the stupid people at this one Amazon warehouse forced their employees to work there even when a tornado was coming into their place, and a whole bunch of workers got killed because of it. That is where unions are needed so shit like that doesn't happen again.
Thereby leading to the death of 6 workers, and threatening its workers to go back to work when they stop because of a warehouse fire, and generally can't tell the difference between these two things. Having a union there to stand up to management isn't just a matter of improving things for the long run, it's about saving people's lives and protecting their dignity right now. Unions are great because they take the lopsided power structure of a private business. You do what you're told or you're fired, and they rebalance it. With a union there to strike when management's demands get out of hand, to protect someone from getting unjustly fired, and to get more money, benefits, and protections in everybody's contracts, your boss can't do whatever they want anymore. So, as you might expect, the surge in collective organizing has come with a corresponding surge in union busting. Big business owners aren't ready to let go of all the power they've accumulated during the neoliberal era, so they're fighting back as hard as they can. But they won't admit it outright. Public support for unions is way too high and way too widespread for anti-unionism to be good PR. So guys like Jeffy B say that it's all about workers' choices.
We don't believe that we need a union to be an intermediary between us and our employees. But of course, at the end of the day, it's always the employee's choice.
But actions speak louder than words, and when it comes to union busting, Bezos' words are like a whisper in a pillow. And to make that point crystal clear, the rest of this video is just going to be a catalog of all the different union busting strategies we could find, so that you can not only recognize them if they ever apply to you and your workplace, but more generally get a better idea of what employers are willing to do, both legally and illegally, to make sure your voice at their company stays suppressed. For starters, just to give you an idea of scale, US businesses spend $340 million a year on union avoidance advisors alone. In order to avoid paying their workers more, companies are ready to spend around $350 an hour, or $2,500 a day, on lawyers and consultants to come up with union-busting strategies and mine legal documents for ways to punish worker organizations. And the things they come up with can be truly disgusting. The most obvious one is firing the people they think are leading the unionization movement. Like what happened at Starbucks stores here, and here, as well as many more locations across the country, amounting to at least 85 workers. Management gets a whiff of unionization, and they'll just start firing the troublemakers. And if you're thinking, that sounds like it should be illegal, it already is. The National Labor Relations Act, or NLRA, makes it illegal for employers to fire workers for trying to unionize. Just like it also makes it illegal to fire everyone at once by shutting down a branch in the process of unionizing, which Starbucks has also coincidentally done at multiple locations. But employers know that, and they don't care. When they want to shut down the union, they'll just skirt the law by finding a BS reason to shut down a store, like citing safety concerns. Or will find a BS reason to fire an employee. For example, suddenly enforcing a technical rule that's never been enforced before, like what happened to this Starbucks employee.
It began on January 25th. 2 Buffalo Starbucks locations had already voted to form a union. Another in Mesa, Arizona was in the process, and the workers were gaining steam within the company and in the press. On this Tuesday afternoon, a Starbucks district manager tried to intimidate 19-year-old Layla Dalton, a Phoenix employee, into quitting. The manager said she was suspending Layla and shutting down the store for the day. Her violation? Layla had texted her direct supervisor. According to an NLRB investigation, the manager began enforcing a previously unenforced rule prohibiting employees from communicating with supervisors by text message. Layla had texted her boss at least 12 times before this incident without any problems, but suddenly she was being suspended for it.
What companies like Starbucks do in these situations is incredibly transparent, but they couldn't care less if they get caught. At worst, the NLRA only requires that an illegally fired employee be given back pay and reinstated. There are no punitive damages or civil penalties, even if the company is found guilty. So firing a worker for trying to unionize is not only easy, it's cheap. It's why employers are charged with violating federal law in 41.5% of all union election campaigns, and why 1 out of 5 union election campaigns involves a charge that a worker was illegally fired for union activity. Breaking the law doesn't really have any consequences, so might as well do it and fire union leaders. Worst case scenario, they get a little money back. And that's assuming businesses even get caught. Because the NLRB, the institution in charge of enforcing these laws, is completely overwhelmed and can't possibly monitor every employer's illegal union busting. Funding for the NLRB has not budged in the last 9 years, so inflation has eaten away 25% of its budget, and it's lost 39% of its staff in the last 2 decades. Businesses just aren't worried about breaking the law, and why would they be? Odds are, no one will do anything about it. Now, let's get back to the union busting strategies. Another totally illegal move companies like to pull is threatening to withhold pay raises or benefits from workers trying to unionize, which by now, no one should be surprised to find out, Starbucks did that too. According to an Axios report, Starbucks gave pay raises and benefits to non-union workers while withholding them from stores trying to unionize. And they even gave those same non-union employees extra perks, like more sick time, a looser dress code, and more access to tips. All that to discourage workers from unionizing, which, once again, super illegal and shitty. But there's more. Companies also have no qualms about going the extra mile and straight up spying on their employees to prevent a union from forming. This became increasingly popular during the pandemic, when employers used so-called bossware, which can screenshot the websites you visit, record employees' faces and voices, log their keystrokes, track their location, and even monitor their calls and text messages. That's for the digital side. In the case of Amazon's Whole Foods, management went so far as to use real-life heat maps to track workers' locations and predict which stores were likely to unionize. You know, that very cool, totally normal, not at all dystopian kind of stuff you love to see from your favorite family-friendly grocery store. But as shocking as these examples are, they're just the most sensational tactic that employers use. They're incredibly common, but the tragic reality is that union busting is more often than not a matter of doing perfectly legal harassing and slowly putting more and more pressure on workers until they break. To do that, companies resort to a couple strategies. The most well-known being so-called captive audience meetings. Essentially, perfectly legally, your boss can force you to attend a meeting where they will spend as much time as they want bad-mouthing the union and intimidating you into voting no to unionization. Employers can discipline or even fire people that refuse to attend these meetings, or that choose to leave early. They can schedule as many of them as they want and at any time of the day. And all with the only constraint being that they can't do it within 24 hours of a union election. In contrast, workers trying to get a union going aren't allowed to hold meetings on company property, can't take time out of their coworkers' day, and their boss has no requirement to give them a list of the company's employees, so they can't even easily contact everyone. Unions are at a massive disadvantage. And if you're thinking, so what? You probably don't know what these captive meetings can look like.
The meetings have gotten increasingly anti-union. In the beginning, it was kind of like, let's talk about what makes you love Starbucks. And then it got more and more, the union will control you, which is something that's actually in one of their slides. And they were implying it was going to be like a Crucible or Salem witch trial of like everybody putting each other on trial.
They really stopped just a sentence short of basically saying, hey, if you join this union, there's a chance that you could go to jail. I mean, we know that these are lies. And we've got partners who are 17 and 18 years old. If you're telling me that wasn't meant to scare people into thinking that, this is something they could potentially be tried in a court of law for, I don't know what else the purpose of that would have served.
That kind of intimidation is terrible, and it's not just happening in meetings. Companies intimidate their workers and beat them over the head with propaganda during every waking moment and by any means available in the run-up to a union election. As a worker trying to form a union at Boeing described it back in 2017, a normal day consists of, you go to work, you'll hear something anti-union at your morning meeting, there will be some literature handed out, so when you take your breaks in the break area, they've got the TVs running and they play anti-union commercials throughout the day, and you top that off when you get home. You've got the anti-union commercials, radio and TV, and then you check your mailbox and you've got anti-union literature in your mailbox. And just so you know what to expect if this ever happens to you, anti-union messaging almost always relies on the same arguments. A good chunk of them are baseless appeals to emotion. For example, your boss might say that a union will ruin the family vibe at work. Or lie and tell you that the union will ask you to engage in acts of violence, or that come strike time, a union won't support you like they promised they will. It's all unfounded, but it's repeated over and over and over, and it's not really designed to have you hating the union so much as it is trying to plant a seed of doubt in your mind that can make sticking with the status quo feel like the safer option, and going with the union seem like a risk. But if that doesn't work, anti-union rhetoric will either be straight-up intimidation, like the way Starbucks implies legal repercussions, or more quote-unquote pragmatic arguments. Inevitably, any union effort getting close to the finish line will be hit with a "what about union dues" display, like this poster at Delta, or this display at Boeing, where managers prominently arranged a pile of goods in the break room to convince their workers that union dues are too expensive. But like we've already mentioned, unions raise wages. Even assuming you make minimum wage, a totally average 13% increase equals $2,000 more extra at the end of the year in salary raises alone. Not to mention the odds that your benefits go up too. Union dues at Starbucks, just as an example, are at most around $550 a year. So unionizing, in a totally run-of-the-mill hypothetical, is a roughly $1,500 profit. Not to mention the fact that without a union, your boss could always lower your salary at any time, or refuse to give you a raise while inflation keeps eating away at the value of your pay. And look, we're at minute
13
of this video, and I still have many union-busting strategies I couldn't even cover. A good, 10 in this table alone are not only well-known union-busting strategies, they're all completely legal. I can't even mention every union-busting strategy in this video because employers just have every weapon they could ever want to shut down a budding union. And that even includes actual weapons. It's not uncommon for companies to call the cops on strikers to intimidate and in some cases even attack them. That is how policing began in this country after all. For context, just try to imagine workers calling the cops on their boss.
Kind of one thing that I sort of agree with. I'd go further. Honestly, if we do get rid of the concept of cop, and at least on the local level, and basically investigate every single cop, and we'll probably find you're going to wind up being able to justify executing probably 2/3 of them.
Workers just don't have that option. Management has every single union-busting...
There have been attempted massacres of workers by bosses as well.
Strategy they could ever want available to them, even the illegal ones. But even if they all fail, even if employers really throw everything at the wall and nothing sticks and the union vote is successful, management still has a trick up their sleeve. They wait you out. Once the union wins, all companies have to do to stay on top is not sign a contract. Because if a year goes by after a union election without a contract being signed between the union and the company can start trying to get the union decertified, and then it's back to square one. It is an understatement to say that the system is rigged against workers. The truth is that it couldn't be more inhospitable to labor organizing. I mean, even the self-proclaimed most pro-labor president in American history is a goddamn strikebreaker.
Yep,
Power
we
is
covered
not
last
on the
time,
workers'
too.
side. And that's why it's so encouraging to see how successful workers' movements are at the moment. The deck is stacked so heavily against workers, and yet the public is on their side and they're winning. Battle after battle. We're seeing people, for the first time in a while, collectively beating the odds, learning from their experience, and using that knowledge to help one another have a better life. The ball is already rolling. So if you watched this video and you'd like to try to unionize your workplace, there has never been a better time in recent history to do it. To help, I've put links to the IWW's website in the description. Not only does the IWW have plenty of resources for you to read, you can use their site to get in touch with experts who can help you unionize your workplace, fight back against the dirty tricks your employer will use, and win. And if you're not employed, or if your job is already unionized, you can still help others with this process by handing out pamphlets or other information in the stores you visit. Just be subtle about it. You don't want to get the employees in trouble. People always ask, every week, about what they can do to help. How we, as individual workers, can make a difference. Unionization, even just educating yourself and your coworkers about building labor power, is one of the most critical ways we can fight back against an oppressive capitalist system. We're at the very beginning of a new labor movement, and we need everyone to get involved, fight back, and build a better future for all of us. I mentioned at the beginning of this video.
So yeah, what do you guys say about that? The corporations are still mauling because they keep losing, as always.
Of course. It's no surprise. I'm gonna say it right now. What was I gonna say? I can't remember. Expect violence to increase as more groups attempt to unionize, and honestly expect them to start murdering people.
Because that has happened before, people, especially in America. Yep. That's happened before, so do not be surprised. And of course, keep this momentum up, as unions have been fighting strong the last 2 years and been winning over and over and over again. So, hopefully, that momentum, and of course, other good things, hopefully can continue on into 2023, which is just 2 days away, or 1 day away from you. So anyways, guys, hopefully 2023 will be a much better year, and we'll see you next time in 2023 for episode 67. So, see you all next time.
See you guys then.